Hi, good morning, and welcome to another edition of United Way for Southeastern Michigan's What's the Word Wednesday, where we share important resources and have vibrant conversations about the topics that matter most to you. My name is Audrey Walker, and today we are kicking off our Equity Challenge series of What's the Word Wednesday town halls by discussing legal system inequities and how organizations like Lakeshore Legal Aid are working to close the justice gap. A few reminders for today's discussion. We hope to have time for a few questions from our audience, so please put your questions in the chat box on Zoom or in the comments section if you're watching on Facebook. Closed captions are enabled in Zoom and Facebook Live. To turn them on, please click on the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen. So hopefully you've heard by now that United Way's fourth annual 21-day equity challenge kicked off last Friday, and we couldn't be more excited and eager to embark on 21 days of new equity-focused content with thousands of our friends here in Metro Detroit and across the nation. In coordination with this year's Equity Challenge, all of our What's the Word Wednesday town halls in May and June will feature topics, organizations, and speakers that relate directly to diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. Many of our partner organizations wrote content for this year's Equity Challenge, and in the next few weeks, some will be joining us in this Equity Challenge series. We hope that you'll continue to join us over the next few weeks as we take a deeper dive into some truly critical and timely topics. Access to the legal system and equitable legal representation is incredibly important and can sometimes be detrimental to our quality of life. We know that 40% of households here in Southeastern Michigan are often living one missed paycheck away from financial crisis, and sometimes this can be interconnected with our legal system. Organizations such as Lakeshore Legal Aid are vital for improving these conditions and promoting accessibility and knowledge of the legal system. And I'm pleased to introduce you to our speaker for today, Justin Williams. Justin is the Chief Equity Officer at Lakeshore Legal Aid, and Lakeshore Legal Aid provides free direct legal representation in Southeastern Michigan and provides client intake, advice, and brief legal services throughout Michigan via attorney staff telephone hotline. Justin is a passionate advocate for traditionally underserved communities with experience tailored toward fostering diversity and inclusion in the higher education space. He received his doctorate of law from Michigan State University College of Law. So welcome, Justin. We're so glad you're here with us today and can be sharing more about Lakeshore Legal Aid.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you all for having me. More particularly, I want to thank the United Way and the wonderful team for holding space for us to have this very important conversation, specifically about equity in the legal system and the ways in which we can do better, right? To serve as many people as humanly possible. I am immensely proud of the work we do at Lakeshore Legal Aid and continue to do to help bridge that gap and sort of close it, right? When we think about access to justice. And I'm happy to be here to talk a little bit about what that looks like, right? What does it mean, right, to have an access gap, right, an equity gap in the legal system, and sort of what that can look like in practice, right? Again, my name is Justin Williams. I'm the Chief Equity Officer at Lakeshore Legal Aid. And what does that mean in short? It is my responsibility to ensure that we are who we say we are, right? And so when I say we are who we say we are, I am reminded of our mission at Lakeshore Legal Aid, which states standing with our neighbors. Lakeshore Legal Aid fights poverty and injustice through advocacy and providing meaningful and dignified access to the legal system. I want to highlight that notion of both meaningful and dignified, right? Those are two important qualifiers, and they are why my role exists, right? To ensure that we are consistently delivering on that promise, right? To provide folks meaningful and dignified access to the legal system. But the call of the question is really about access to justice, right? What is that, right? What does it mean to have a gap in that space? And so I want folks to think about it through this lens, right? When we talk about the access to justice, it is a crisis, right? An existing, consistent crisis that disproportionately impacts society's most vulnerable folks, right? And so when you think about folks who exist in the margins, who live in those spaces, whose everyday living experience is a marginalized one, when you think about the justice system, they are frequently impacted by it, and more often than not, have a lack of ability to access that. And so I think it's important that we draw a distinction here pretty early on, right? Because I think when we talk about the justice system, folks often think about it through the lens of like criminal challenges, right? Like the things that we see most prominently, the scandalous tales we see on TV, right? Sort of those courtroom moments where people are in legitimate crisis and experiencing something really tough. But there are two sides to that coin, right? There is the criminal legal system, which essentially focuses on conflicts between people and the state, right? So when you think about the criminal system, think about the people versus the state as a much larger sort of overarching sort of body, right? That is seeking to enforce rules and regulation. But there's also a civil system, right? And so that is what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about because that is what we do at Lakeshore, right? We are civil focused. And the civil system focuses on conflicts between people, right? Conflicts between people and their landlords, right? Conflicts between folks who were married who no longer want to be that way, right? Or folks who have children that they share who are trying to sort through those kinds of problems. And so that is the core of what we do at Lakeshore, right? Is focus on those civil conflicts and helping folks navigate that system and increase their access to that particular system. But there are two sides to that coin. So for anybody who's got questions out there, who is thinking about the criminal side of the house, I cannot touch those questions. I don't have any answers for them, right? Just putting that out there. But that is the heart of what we do. And so I want to circle back to this notion of access to justice, right? So when we think about this notion of access to justice in the civil legal space, it really reflects the gap between the existing needs folks have, right? So like the need for representation in the system, right? The need for a voice and an ability to access the system in a meaningful way, and the existing resources to be able to do that, right? So think about something that's very simple, like I won't even simple's probably not the word, but something like an eviction proceeding, right? Where somebody is about to be removed from their home, right? You get your notice in the mail, it's really tough, really difficult, and you're thinking, okay, I'm not even going to go, right? I'm not even going to participate in this because I don't think the problem can be resolved through that system. I can't afford an attorney. All of these very different things that folks can experience when they're having some of these tough sort of personal experiences. And the ability of folks to really engage in this process in a meaningful way, right, is what we're talking about when we talk about the access to justice and the limited resources that are out there for folks to be able to do that. Some of that is about access to attorneys. I think that folks typically presume that is the biggest thing, right? And it's a good portion of it, right, is simply access to representation at all. But that goes back to our mission, right? When we talk about the notion of meaningful and dignified access too, right? Thinking about what like having representation means. And that means an attorney who is conscientious of you, right? And aware of your situation, culturally competent, right? Always thinking about how they can best serve the client that is in front of them and provide them meaningful representation in this very difficult process and experience. Some of it is also about physical environment too, right? So this notion of just the court being an intimidating and sort of unwelcome space for people, right? What does it mean to walk into a courthouse and sort of feel, right, that it is a place where you are not going to get the thing that you are most likely seeking, right? You're not going to have the kind of experience that is meaningful and impactful for you. And then there's also a knowledge gap too, right? So many, if not most folks, are impacted by the legal system in ways that they don't understand, right? And they aren't clear on what their options are, right? What their choices are, the ways in which they can engage in the system to secure the best possible outcome for themselves, right? And so when we think about that access to justice and that gap that exists, It's more than just the access to attorneys. It is the very physical structure of the court, right? And folks' own ideas in their heads of what they can do in the system, right? What the system can do for them, how they can benefit and leverage the system to secure their own best possible outcome, right? And so, um, let's talk about who it really impacts, right? Like very specifically. And so when we talk about that access to justice and the gap that exists, it is most prominently felt by folks who are experiencing poverty, right? Folks who have lower income, right? The many different ways that we sort of term that, right? And so when we think about who it impacts, and folks who are living in that sort of living in circumstances where they're experiencing poverty, 92% of those folks don't get the help they need, right? Think about that. 9 out of 10 folks who are experiencing impacts of the civil legal system do not get the help that they need, right? That is 9 out of 10 folks, and that is an astounding number. It should really blow everybody's doors off, right? The 9 out of 10 folks who are living in poverty have a civil legal need that is not being met, right? Something is happening to them. Somebody is pursuing them in a way in the legal system for which they don't have representation. They don't have truly, right, an opportunity to advocate for themselves in that process. And to give you some greater perspective on sort of the prominence of this as a thing, so 92% of folks do not get access to that justice, right? 74% of folks who are experiencing poverty, so 3 out of 4 folks, will experience or have experienced in the past year one or more sort of legal problems, right? Think about that as like the household, right? So everybody who was in that household, there is at least one or more sort of legal problems, civil legal problems that they are experiencing and have to deal with. 40%, almost half of those folks, 5 or more problems, right? So when you think about that, like the ways in which systems exist and operate and the ways in which they can sort of compound themselves, imagine the fact that almost half of the folks who are living or experiencing poverty, 40% of those folks are experiencing 5 or more civil legal problems in the last year, right? Just in the last year, not like the long tail of their lives, just in the last year. And it can, sort of thinking about it even more, right? So you've got at least 20% of those families, right? So 10 or more of these problems, right? 20% of these households that are living through poverty, 10 or more civil legal problems in the last year, right? And so, when we think about intersectionality, when we think about the ways in which, sort of the force multiplier of living in poverty, right, can sort of have on folks' existence, just thinking about the civil legal problems that folks face, they are tremendous, right? They can be numerous, and so, again, talking about that justice gap and the ability to access it, it is so very important that there is somebody there, right? That there is something there for folks to be able to have access to that system. And so that is where organizations like mine come in. So I work for Lakeshore Legal Aid, as you all know. We are a legal services provider. Our services are free to clients, right? We've been doing this for over 58 years. We started at this work in 1966 and have been doing it ever since. We provide free civil legal services to Michigan seniors, right? Folks who are living in low income circumstances, survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking, right? We are not the only game in town. There are other organizations that do this work, but we are one of the many, right, who are out there sort of helping folks do this. And there are other resources that are out there to help folks in the system. Like I talked about earlier, it's not just about more lawyers, right? I think the presumption is the answer is more lawyers, system works, everybody wins, and that is not the case. Some of it is about introducing folks to ways in which they can help themselves, right? So self-help is a big part of this process, right? Many times just knowing what your options are and what is happening to you, what the path will look like, is liberation for folks, right? Is equity sort of focused and equity minded, right? And so that starts with a bundle of great resources. A big one, a very important one, I think everybody should know about is Michigan Legal Help. And so, that is a resource I will consistently direct folks to who have legal questions and are trying to get those answers. MichiganLegalHelp.org, and you can be connected to representation, right? Be able to have sort of a conversation with somebody about what that looks like, and also see and better understand the system and how it's impacting you and what's happening to you in that space. Also, the Michigan Supreme Court's Justice for All Commission, right? So that is a body that exists to really address the issues of access to justice, right? And figuring out how we can do that better here in the state of Michigan. And so some of that is focused on the physical environment of the courts, right? Is it accessible? Can folks really come to this space and feel like they are going to get outcomes that, you know, are satisfactory for them or make them feel like they've had their voice heard and represented in the process? Changes to the ways in which we collect debt, right? Don't know how many people here have experienced that, but debt collection can be a very nerve-wracking experience, right? When you've got a bad debt out there, the things that can happen to folks in that process. So focusing on changes around that. And also thinking about how we can expand the pie and who gets a seat at the table of giving folks legal advice, right? The regulations on the practice of law, right? To really be able to expand that and give folks room to have those questions and those conversations. And so I guess I want to put a sort of a bow on this, right? And say that, you know, the headline here is that most folks will at some point in their lives encounter the legal system in some way, right? And so how do we get ourselves into a space where we are making the system more equitable, specifically for folks who have the least access, who are the furthest away, right, from equitable access to that system. It starts with organizations like ours. It also starts with really being able to create space for folks to get access to the knowledge they need to be able to help themselves. You know, again, I want to thank the United Way for giving me the space to sort of talk about this and share some thoughts on it. And I believe we're going to move to the handy dandy Q&A portion of this process, which
Yeah.
is the thing I love the most, is really being able to talk to folks. So I am looking forward to answering any questions that you all have. If anybody's got a question I can't answer in real time, always feel free to reach out, and we will. I'm going to cede the floor to Audrey to get us into
Yeah.
the.
I want to thank you so much, Justin, for sharing a little bit about what Lakeshore Legal Aid does and also just knowledge about access to justice and gaps that are out there. Because I know you highlighted a few things like access to attorneys, the
Yeah.
court being a maybe unwelcoming space, and a little bit about that knowledge gap. And I was just curious, what are some inequities and injustices that you're witnessing currently in the legal system?
Well, I mean, so you know, that's I think the answer to that is really the biggest inequity is just people being able to engage in the process, right? Like having an understanding of what their options are, what
Right.
the process is itself, what is happening to them, right? Because very often the legal system is acting on people, right?
Hmm.
It is like things are happening to people in this space, and they have no idea what's going on. They don't know what their options are. They don't understand the language of the court, right? Because for many folks, like the language of the law is a foreign language, right?
Right.
Which is why, you know, representation matters, right? And attorneys in many ways are translators, right? They function as we are teaching you, they are teaching you the language of the thing that is happening to you and giving you the tool to be able to respond to those things in a language that the system responds to. And so I think it would probably be just really folks understanding the system itself, what is happening to them, in the ways in which they can engage in it to get better outcomes for themselves. And so I think that will probably be the thing I would say is like the highline issue from my perspective.
Okay. And so then what are some of the most common legal issues that people face? And does Lakeshore Legal Aid help people with filing legal claims against each other?
So I'm always going to tell folks Michigan Legal Help, right? If you've got
Okay.
any questions about what your options are and what you can do and whether or not a thing is a thing that can be done through a legal aid organization, is I'm always going to tell folks to go to Michigan Legal Help because so many of the questions at a very basic level are answered there, right? It gives folks good guidance. And if it's a question that's nuanced, right, sometimes you can be pointed in the direction of an attorney who can answer that for you, right, and really help
Hmm.
you get that figured out. You know, I think for us, we touch a lot of different sort of legal matters, right? So it can be housing related, like so eviction defense, right? It can be protection from abuse. It could be expungement, right? It's some of it's family law stuff, some of it's driver's license related things, right? Education, estate planning, consumer related things, right? So there's a lot of areas that we touch on. I think that housing related work is a big piece of what we do, right? Specifically eviction defense, landlord tenant issues, right? Things that are centered on that are some of the work that we're most proud of. So.
And how do you all ensure that you are providing legal assistance in an equitable way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think some of it starts with who we partner with to support and fund our work, right? And what we are called to do as a function of that funding, right? We have a wonderful partnership with the United Way, right? Who funds a portion of our work that's focused on like eviction prevention, right? Specifically serving clients who are ALICE clients. And so what that means is asset limited, income constrained, employed folks, right?
Mhm.
And some of those funding opportunities allow us to provide representation in a different and more holistic way, employing community advocates who sort of function as not necessarily wraparound, right, for folks, but really helping folks understand the other things that are happening to them and meet those needs and respond to those things in a meaningful way. And I think that is a portion of the way in which, right, we really push the needle, right, sort of move the, sort of move the ball as it relates to equity in the space. So.
And I was just curious when if people come to Lakeshore Legal Aid, is there qualification or income limit for eligibility or anything like that when we're talking about legal services that you all help with?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And so, the answer is it depends, right? Like we do have sort of qualifications, but everybody's situation we evaluate individually, right?
Okay,
And again, when folks have questions about what we can and can't do, what sort of their options are, I always encourage folks, Michigan Legal Help, right? Because there are other organizations that do this work. We are not the only game in town, right?
hmm,
And so some of it also is about figuring out what you can do for yourself too, right? And
yeah.
so, always pointing folks in the direction of like a baseline resource is Michigan Legal Help and saying, okay, what is the question that you have? What are you trying to get addressed? Right. And what is the rightest way for you to go about getting that sorted, right? Typically who we help, again, folks who are low income, right? That number can vary, right? Seniors, right? Folks who are survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, trafficking, elder abuse, right? Folks who are U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, and some others who are not documented, right? But also because of like our structure, right? We're a nonprofit funded by grants, right? Our services can be limited, right? Based on the availability of attorneys and other resources, right? And
Hmm.
so, my advice to folks all the time, right? Because I get these questions frequently is Michigan Legal Help. Go there first, right? And figure out like what the situation is, what your options are, and sort of take it from there.
And it sounds like Michigan Legal Help is a great resource, so that sounds like a good place for people to start.
Absolutely.
What are some
Absolutely.
other ways that community members can learn about navigating the legal system, knowing their rights, and being able to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think again the biggest one. I mean, honestly, like, and I know I've said this multiple times, but it's such a great resource, right? I think if you started Michigan Legal Help, that will give you the baseline knowledge you need to truly understand what is happening, right? Like what your options are in the system, the ways in which you can navigate, support, and engage in it. Watch the news, right? There's a lot of stuff out there about what is happening in the legal system and some of the developments that are taking place. And so making yourself aware through that lens, like just being aware, right? Having your
Sure.
ears sort of perked up and always listening out for the ways in which the system is shifting and changing here in ways that we believe can support the clients that we serve and the communities that we exist in and represent. And so, I think it's just making yourself aware of these things first. Always be looking for those things. And also, just making sure that again you are using the resources available to you. Again, if folks have like pressing legal needs or questions about things that they can do, we do have our advocacy law line call,
That's
right, that
right.
folks can reach out to try to get some of those questions answered. And so, I'll give you all that phone number as well. Oh, looks like it's in the box. All
You
right.
got
Thank you. Yeah, this is
it.
Shayla is on it. All right. Love it, love it, love it. But yeah, so just making sure the folks are engaging and being aware of what's happening, making those contacts when they need to, right, to get the questions that they have answered and really going about it that way.
Mhm. And so that's lakeshorelegal.org, or you can call 888-783-8190. And
Absolutely.
for this attorney staff telephone hotline. So that's
Absolutely.
another great resource that people have available to them. And I
Absolutely.
know we had a lot of questions, specific questions in the chat that I'm sorry we weren't able to get to, but I do hope that these resources that we've outlined here can also be a place where you can go to get some of those questions answered for you as well. So Justin, I just wanted to say thank you again for sharing your knowledge with us today, sharing your
My pleasure.
time and resources about access to justice and how we can all work together here in our community to make that more of a, what I would say, positive experience for people that are, going through some tough times, or just, navigating through the legal system, like you had mentioned. So
Yeah.
really appreciate you being able to share that. And I do have a few more updates here for our audience today. Just as a reminder, anyone in our community who may be experiencing a need, our 211 helpline remains available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it includes resources like helping you get access to food, utility assistance, and much more. We always maintain a running list of available services in our community and can connect you to the support you need. So you can also look up resources at the database unitedwaysem.org/211. And as we talked about earlier, the 21-day equity challenge is here. We're about 4 days in today. So we hope that you are ready to rise to the challenge and create a more equitable future. We'd love for you to join us if you're not signed up already for the United Way for Southeastern Michigan's 4th annual 21-day equity challenge. To sign up for the challenge, you can visit unitedwaysem.org/equity challenge. We'd love for you to join us for that. And in conjunction with our equity challenge, we are excited to bring you an equity-focused town hall series, as we mentioned, in May and June. And next Wednesday, we will be joined by our friends over at the Jewish Family Services of Washington County to talk about equity for immigrant and refugee communities. So to stay updated on upcoming topics and watch replays of previous town halls, please visit unitedwaysem.org/virtual town halls. I'm so glad you were able to join us today, and we really appreciate it. So stay cool out there, and please continue to live united.